I think a lot of problem solving, people are bringing lots of different queries to you. You really have to think on your feet on the shop floor. You've got to be ready for anything in a way. You've got to have a lot of flexibility, help people to have a good experience. And that's exactly the same in human resources. You want people to have a good experience. I think one of the things with HR is so much of what we do is behind the scenes. So when you do get recognised and you do get thanked for something, it kind of goes above and beyond. I think you've got to have a lot of your own resilience, so the earlier you can start focusing on what are the key pillars for you that are going to help you to stay motivated and on that path if that's what you want to achieve, if you want to get a job in HR. There's so many aspects of HR as well. You have to think, what are my genuine experiences and skills that could be transferable? You have to be strategic about it, and you do have to be resilient.
On today's episode, I'm joined by the fabulous Abigail Wilmore. Abigail's journey started on the shop floor, where she rose to success in HR and has worked for some of the most fantastic brands in the luxury retail industry, such as Tom Ford, Stella McCartney, Dr Barbara Sturm and the Gucci Group. Now, Abigail owns and leads People Flow, the most fantastic community built around well-being in a HR function. Listen to today's episode on how she did it and her journey. Abigail, Abby, we met a few weeks ago. I was told by a mutual friend that you were an absolute must meet and that we would get on so well, and I knew instantly as soon as we sat down that was going to be it. And I was like, how have we never ever met before?
I know.
All these years that we've both worked in this industry, and we've never ever crossed paths. It's mad, isn't it?
It is.
So we did have a little chat there, and I said to you that you had to be a guest on this podcast because there's so much about your career that I just really want to dig into, and I want to find out and just hear it from your side, because the luxury retail industry is what we talk about all the time. It's what we do. But hearing it from your perspective, from a really, really high up HR function, is something that I think that so many of our listeners are going to be so intrigued about. So let's start from the beginning. You told me that you started on the shop floor. So where did that all begin, and what was the inspiration from then that led you onto the shop floor initially?
So I have to admit, I wanted to be a ballerina. And when I was about 16, I realised that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't quite good enough. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I kind of fell into the shop floor. My mother is was a makeup artist. She's still alive, but she was a makeup artist, now retired. So I always loved cosmetics. And my grandfather was also a makeup artist, so it was in the family. And so cosmetics and actually walking into a perfumery throughout my childhood, I always loved it. It felt quite natural to go and work for Estée Lauder on the shop floor. I knew as soon as I arrived there that I was going to love it. I think just the sense of like camaraderie that you get on the shop floor, and also just being amongst all these beautiful products all the time, was something that I really loved.
So you mentioned to me that it was Harvey Nichols, wasn't it, that you started in?
Yes.
Why that particular store rather than any of the others?
I think actually, so Harvey Nichols was my main experience, but I think my very first experience was actually D.H. Evans, which doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I do remember.
And then I moved, I did some time in Selfridges as well, but Harvey Nichols was the most memorable. I think because of the buying that you get there and the different brands that you get there. It's smaller and not so overwhelming as some of the bigger stores.
Well, it's still really known, isn't it, for its beauty hall?
Yes.
And a lot of people talk about it still. And it's spectacular, and they've got quite a few different niche brands as well.
Yeah.
Which is, so who did you work for specifically for Estée Lauder? Because obviously they own so many brands.
But actually Lauder.
Actually Lauder.
Lauder.
Okay, all right, amazing. And what was that process like for you at the time? Your interview process to get that job without experience?
Gosh, I'm thinking back. I think it was more the makeup side of it, because my mum had taught me, some techniques and things like that. I think it was more that side that they went for. I have to try and think back to the interview process. But it was definitely my love of cosmetics and being able to make up a face that I think they went for in me, rather than sort of sales techniques. And I definitely learnt that as I went along.
So whilst you were there, was that your last role in retail, actual retail, before then moving on to HR or going into a head office function?
Yeah.
Or was there a bit more of a step before you went into HR initially?
Well, interestingly, I did a few other jobs, sales related jobs, and then Estee Lauder, there was a job in HR for Estee Lauder, and I'd already worked for that brand for a few years. And so somebody, I think like an old manager, had mentioned it to me and said you'd be really good at it. And I think some of the things that I really enjoyed on the shop floor were more the understanding what makes people tick, being part of a team, understanding what makes good teamwork. It was those kinds of things that I was really interested in, as well as the makeup itself. And so somebody suggested it to me, why don't you try HR? So I went for the role and I got the role. So it was at Estee Lauder headquarters in just off Bond Street at the time. And I started at the bottom in a HR admin function and kind of worked my way up from there.
So a lot of people will be thinking that they need a degree, they need to go to university, they need to have various different qualifications, which you openly told me you didn't have at the time. So what was the challenges like initially when you went into that position without necessarily having the experience or the qualifications? Where did you really find yourself at what point?
That's a really good question. I think at that time it was personnel. That was the name of the function. And it was about administration only, really, especially the role that I was in. And so I did have to learn a lot about filing. It was all paper at that time and pretty much all paper. I just picked things up. I just enjoyed the kind of first line support, it was called back then, where people would just call you and ask you about holidays or sick days or things like that. A lot of that I already kind of knew because being on the shop floor and having to deal with that. And, whilst on the shop floor, I had moved into a more of a managerial role as well, like supervisory kind of role of a team. So I knew about working time and that sort of thing. So the role from that respect felt quite natural. And then I'm a people person. And so that part of HR was, grew and grew over the years, I would say, being close to people, understanding the psychology behind why people want to come and do a good job. And then after a few years, I did decide to go and study. So I hadn't got a bachelor's degree. I left after A-levels, I left school and went straight to work. So I went to enroll in an HR qualification that was actually an undergrad, I thought. But when I got to the front of the queue after queuing for about 3 hours, she told me I was in the wrong queue and that it was the postgraduate queue that I'd been waiting in. But as I already had a few years in HR by then, she let me try the postgraduate course, and it took me 4 years at evening school, but in the end I managed to get my master's in human resource management. So obviously that really gave me a lot of confidence and helped me to kind of channel my career. Then I knew it was going to be more than just another job.
Absolutely. I think another thing that you mentioned just there that I think goes back to the shop floor again, you're a people person.
Yeah.
Everybody that knows you knows that you actually, are the ultimate version of that. Do you think that the shop floor really helped to bring that out of you? And did you ever miss it when you transitioned initially?
Yeah, I definitely missed it. I think you miss having to give good customer service and speaking to loads of different people in a day, and also the makeup side, because that is really creative, and I was able to kind of let my creativity go in that sense when I was on the shop floor. But I think I learned a lot of emotional intelligence, just dealing with all different types of people, different problems, and just reading different people and what they wanted. And often, doing somebody's makeup is quite intimate in some ways, and so sometimes people wouldn't be in a good mood and you'd have to kind of work around them. And there were lots of stories like that in hindsight I know taught me a lot about being human.
That was a question I was actually about to ask you. What skills do you think really helped you from the shop floor to then transition into HR.
Yeah.
And anybody that I guess is on the shop floor now that is thinking to do the same things, what would you say that they should really focus on in terms of the people aspect to then make that transition to be successful? As successful as you've been, I suppose.
I think a lot of problem solving, people are bringing lots of different queries to you. You really have to think on your feet on the shop floor. You've got to be ready for anything in a way. You've got to have a lot of flexibility. You really want to help people to have a good experience, and that's exactly the same in human resources. You want people to have a good experience with the company.
So you were at Estee Lauder for how long?
Well, if you count leaving and trying a few other things like selling windows.
Oh, wow. So you left retail completely?
I left retail completely to thinking that I was going to try and make more money doing something else. But then if you include my experience when I went back, it was probably about 6.5 years in total. So 3.5 years on the shop floor and the rest in the head office.
So talk me through then the transition from there. Where did you go after Lauder? Because you've worked for pretty much everyone, anyone who's anyone really, you've been there. And this is why I couldn't believe that we'd never crossed paths.
I know.
So talk me through your journey and why you moved from Lauder to where you went next.
So I wanted to try different industries in human resources. So I did a short time at a recruitment company as their HR person. And then I also did a very short stint in banking, which was about 9 months. I really didn't enjoy that. It was such a huge company and I had a really sort of narrow role. And then I also tried government run, like Transport for London, for probably about a year. And that was... that was just too slow paced and too much red tape. And so all of these were HR roles, but I kind of, wanted to try what sort of industry is going to suit me. And then whilst I was at Transport for London, I got a call about a role at Knight Frank, so property. And I stayed there for about 2.5 years. And that was really my first kind of, I guess, re-entrance into luxury, even though it's property. And I really learnt a lot there. It was a lovely team. It was quite a small team, but they were very much seen as a service provider, as an HR function. But I really learnt a lot there. And then again, I got a call for a role at Gucci Group. It was, and that's really when I joined Gucci. That was kind of, I felt like my career really took off. So that was back in 2006. And I was in a group function then. So I stayed actually doing different roles for about 16 years. But, I had the opportunity to see so many of the brands because I was in a group function until I went into Stella McCartney in 2014. So, it was just an amazing journey to be able to see all these different incredible brands. Gucci was the main brand when I first started there because they had the most amount of employees in the UK. So I was supporting and setting up a shared service for all the brands. So I was able to work with Saint Laurent and Bottega and Sergio Rossi. I'm trying to think of all the brands. Boucheron. There was like 9 or 10 brands at that time. And Stella and McQueen were the 2 smallest, but also the 2 British brands. And obviously their headquarters were in London. And so I would go regularly to meet with them. And as they grew as brands, my role grew. As they became global brands, my role became global. And it was easy enough to sort of support both of those brands because they had very similar sort of strategies and where they were opening stores and that kind of thing, but very different brands from a culture perspective. And this is really also where I started to realise how different culture can be within organisations and what types of people fit well within different types of culture, and became really fascinated by that. And then I was in an amazing position of being able to choose between Stella or McQueen. And I feel very privileged in that. And I could not decide. And at that time, I got a call from a woman who was a CEO at a small lingerie brand called Myla.
Loved that brand.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous brand.
Beautiful brand.
Really beautiful brand. And it was sort of a blank checkbook scenario where they were opening, I don't know, 100 stores in a few years. And I really was impressed with the person who called me. And so I went there. But I pretty much knew as soon as I got there that maybe this wasn't going to be for me. And it turned out to be not quite what they had said it was going to be. Not this woman. She's ended up being my mentor, actually. But just from a company perspective, it just wasn't quite all as it seemed. And so I was searching for my replacement back at Stella. And the CEO called me and he said, look, Abigail, one of the people you've put in front of me I really like. So if you're thinking of coming back, you need to come back now because otherwise we're going to make her an offer. So that was kind of the push to go back. And then I went back into Stella, fully dedicated to just Stella at that time. And then, that was 2014. And that's when my role started to also become really strategic. So I was inside the brand, really designing an HR function and an HR strategy that was going to match this incredible brand, being vegetarian and having such a strong ethos, wanting to change the way the fashion industry worked. And it was just a dream job.
Your eyes light up when you talk about it, actually. And
yeah.
It's so nice to see that. When you reminisce and you think about a time where you were in a particular job and it does it to you.
Yeah.
That's something really special. I'm
Yes.
going to ask you a question because obviously you've had an experience outside of the luxury fashion industry within HR. Mm-hmm. What do you think the unique challenges have been within HR, within the luxury retail fashion industries, which other industries may not encounter?
That's a really good question. I think one of the things is that fashion always needs to reinvent itself continually. And the cycles of fashion in particular, so separate to beauty, but the cycles of fashion are quite relentless. And I think that becomes part of the culture to reinvent all the time, coming up with newness. And often there can be quite a clash in terms of creatives who just want to be creative, but actually they're kind of forced to be commercial as well. And that could create quite a lot of the drama and, difficulty, I would say, within culture of all the brands that I saw. What else is unique to luxury? I think the kind of luxury experience that's expected from a consumer perspective is also, expected from an employee to come into a luxury brand. And often behind the scenes of luxury brands, it's not all that luxury. It can be quite scrappy. And so being a part of helping to build that from an HR perspective was really exciting. But that is something that is an expectation from people. And often I think luxury brands can be quite far behind some other industries in terms of technology and, some maybe employee benefits and things like that. So there's quite a long way to go and a lot to do.
I've seen a massive improvement, though,
Yes.
the last few years, massively. Yeah. But I'm going to come back to that. A question I wanted to ask you is, you are an absolute champion of human-centred workplace and building amazing cultures and cultural change within industry, within particular businesses. What do you think the key steps are that you took in your previous roles to really foster empathy and inclusion in these really high-pressured environments?
I think you always have to look at the experience that employees are having, and you need to ask them. You need to understand what experience they're actually having and how, the different initiatives or the different pathways that you're creating as a human resources function are actually being felt by them, because what you design might not actually land in the way that you think it's going to. And so always going back to the actual employee experience and setting up ways to listen to people, whether that's through, actually asking them face to face or focus groups or having engagement surveys, whatever ways you can to design policy and frameworks and design the future of that organisation with the actual employees, the better.
That leads me on to something really interesting, actually. Was there a particular moment in your career that you felt that really solidified you being there, that you thought, right, I know now that this is what I was put on planet Earth to do? It was to be in a people function, to be in HR. Was there ever a time, because you've explained now that there was so many different transitions.
Yeah.
Is there a memorable time that you think, this is where I'm meant to be?
I felt that a lot of my career, this is where I'm meant to be. I mean, I think because in HR, you do have the privilege of being able to impact people's actual lives in terms of their career, their development, their learning. That is just really fulfilling when people tell you. I think one of the things with HR is so much of what we do is behind the scenes. So when you do get recognised and you do get thanked for something, it kind of goes above and beyond because, you know you've made a difference to somebody. But honestly, the real impact that I knew I was having was probably when the pandemic happened, which is quite late on in my career. Just at that time, we didn't have a CEO. Oh, no, we did have a CEO, but he was really new. And
you at Stella at this time,
I was at Stella
during COVID, yeah? Okay.
I think for a lot of HR people, that is when we were suddenly thrust into the spotlight and expected to be, the fountain of all knowledge, when of course we weren't. But people were really looking to us, and I felt at that time, because we had a new CEO as well and he didn't really know the organisation, it was me that was kind of speaking to the entire company every day. So it wasn't a particularly, obviously, nice time for anybody, but it really showed what HR can do. I think people started to realise, oh, wow, this is part of what HR does, and all these, divergent needs that came to the surface at that time that HR had to also find a way to navigate through for organisations in the best way, without knowing, what was going to happen even the next day.
Such a key spotlight on you at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, would you say that was one of your biggest challenges?
Definitely. To navigate that and help others through such uncertainty. And also, a lot of people lost their jobs and stores closed for so long, and just the not knowing, I think, was probably the hardest part. But I learned so much about myself through that period of how to help people through something with dignity and respect. And that's even if you don't know the answers, or even if you don't know what's going to happen, down the road, that you are telling people as much as you can in that moment, was really important part of it. And I think it really showed in that time who are the good leaders here, like who's now stepping forward and taking this on from an empathy standpoint. And you spoke about empathy before. However much work or influence was going on before the pandemic actually happened, you were seeing it in real time during, that reality. And I think a lot more kindness was being shown, and real empathy was coming through from those leaders who wanted to step forward.
It's a really, really good point. And before I move on to some other questions that I've got for you, something that was really highlighted during that time, especially with us and our business, during that time speaking to so many different candidates from all different brands, was it really highlighted the brands that cared for their employees.
Yeah.
And obviously that came from the people function, and it really made a difference to their brand PR and the, I guess the perception that the candidates had of different brands that they then wanted to work for later down the line.
Yeah.
So it was a really valid point. So when did you decide, and what was the deciding factor for you to then exit from Stella?
So I'd been there, if you count the time when I first started at Gucci Group, for 16 years. And so we had a new CEO and almost entirely new leadership team had come on board. We'd come through the pandemic and out the other side, and it felt like we were going on an upwards, spike again. And I just thought, I'm I've rather than stay here and do that again, I would like to try something else. And I was quite burnt out. I didn't really realise at that time, but I was quite burnt out from just being on the whole of the pandemic, from the second I opened my eyes till the second that I closed them. And yeah, so I decided that I would actually, during the pandemic time, we went down to 4 days a week, and so I took that opportunity with that extra day to do some consulting. So I knew already, I'd been consulting for about a year before I decided to that it was my time to try something else. I wasn't sure if I was going to consult, and then one of Stella's friends, Barbara Sturm, came along, and it was a much smaller company. And still global and amazing products back in beauty. And it felt like I could do that as well as have these consultancy, clients. So that's what I did. And that was a really great opportunity, lovely brand, amazing people, set up lots of good kind of foundational HR stuff there. And then kind of still knew inside that I was really enjoying the consultancy side. And around that same time, I'd started to have these breakfasts with just different sets of people, all in HR, tending to be more like up-and-coming HR people. And I was hosting these breakfasts, just asking people how they were feeling, how they were taking care of their well-being. It's something that I've always been interested in, and been on my own sort of journey of discovery of wellness and healing, probably for the last decade. And I was getting a lot of tears and emotion, and I realised that HR, it's not just me that's feeling burnt out from what we've all just been through, but it seems like a lot of the profession is. And so that also started me thinking that I really want to do something here about the fact that HR is burning out, and just understand a bit more about what's going on. And that's what's turned into a really amazing, vibrant community for HR, which is what I'm now running, as well as the consultancy side. I did also have a role at Tom Ford, which was amazing as well, in between this time, and I was there for about 10 months. But I just knew in my heart that the consultancy and community was really what I wanted to do. And Tom Ford is an incredible brand, and I was definitely dazzled by the brands, but knew that my heart and soul was really about the community and what difference it could make, and just understanding what HR people have been through. Because I mean, a lot of industry across industry is burnt out at the moment. Burnout is rife, but particularly for HR people, I think carrying their employees through the pandemic and what that meant to them out the other side, and also at the same time, with the murder of George Floyd and social injustice reawakening, let's say, and also increased awareness around mental health. I think all of these factors have played into why HR is burnt out, or just got so much more on our shoulders now. Much of it really positive shifts forward that needed to happen, but just a lot of us feeling like perhaps we're not equipped to deal with all of this, and this has all happened in the last 4 years.
It's mad, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I came to your event, when was it, a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah.
And it was so apparent that this is something that you are so passionate about, and it was just lovely to see, and to be in that room full of people that were so like-minded. I wrote that on my LinkedIn, but I really felt passionate about that, and it really came through from you. So how do you see HR's role now in employees' well-being? It's obviously it's only been spoken about in recent years, so how do you feel that they're really going to make a difference for their employees now?
I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of ways that we can build a wellbeing strategy. First of all, it is about the different kind of options that you're giving people, and you need to think about the entire spectrum of people in your company, and being able to offer options that feel like people have a personal choice, with what they might need, whether that's talking therapies or, different tech for differently abled people, or, neurodivergence, whatever it is, having as many options as you possibly can to help people in their experience that they're having with your organisation, and trying to make it as easily accessible as possible, rather than having all these different options in different places that are hard to kind of find and navigate, because that's one of the things that's so complicated for people, is understanding of what does the company actually offer. And often, people, however much you kind of communicate about it as an HR function, people still don't know everything that there is. So there's that. But then I think there's a lot of what we can offer as options are often just plasters over big systemic issues. And so HR's role, like every leader's role in an organisation really, but it's HR's role to be able to shine a light on what are the issues within a culture that need to also be resolved, so that people's well-being can be positively impacted, whether that's from a psychological safety standpoint, or a conflict standpoint, or multiple different things which might be happening within a company at any one time. And it is our duty, not just our responsibility, because it is everyone's responsibility to build culture and to make it a healthy place to work, but it is our responsibility to shine a light on these things, because we have access to that data. If we're asking the questions, we can often see things that no other function can actually see within an ecosystem of an organisation, more than the CEO, even more than store managers. I mean, store managers also, from within their kind of ecosystem, also have a unique view. But I think HR really can see every part of that organisation, and so we do have a responsibility to speak up about those things and bring solutions to try and solve those things. So I think it's a combination of those two factors, figuring out the options for well-being and healing, and then actually trying to solve what the issues are or provide solutions for that.
It must be very difficult to, and I'm not even sure if this has happened to you, and it's a question that I want to ask. I think in this industry, there are some companies that are, I guess, have got a bit of a reputation of not having the best culture, especially when it comes to being on the shop floor and that environment. Would you say it's really challenging, if you are entering a brand as a HR function, to be able to change that culture, or to implement things to allow the wider business to accept the fact that perhaps they don't have the best culture currently and things need to change? Would you say that's really difficult? It
is really hard. And, the word toxic gets used a lot, probably overused. But I mean, from personnel, when I first started in human resources, to then HR, to then people and culture in a lot of places, does kind of suggest that HR is responsible for culture, which isn't really fair, because, no one function can impact. It really takes everybody. I think it is our responsibility, though, I'll say again, to shine a light on the different reasons as to why culture is difficult or toxic. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to what people at the top think and how they're going to behave, and the example that they're setting. And if that is not good, then there's not that much. I mean, you can put as many buffers in place as you want as an HR team, but unless that's going to change at the top of an organisation, then it's really, really difficult.
I'm going to throw in another little extra question, just because it was actually Charlie, my colleague, she sent me a post last night on LinkedIn that I was looking at, and it hit me because as a recruiter, we're constantly being told by our clients, oh, I don't want to see anybody with a jumpy CV. You know, if they've been at one place for, I don't know, a year and then somewhere else for 10 months or whatever. For us, because we're interviewing these people and we interview them not just based on their skill set, but really try and understand them as individuals and their motivations and personalities, etc. We are often told by these candidates that they were caught up in quite a toxic environment in particular workplaces, which is why they then left. I think I wanted your opinion on that. If you were to see that in a CV, you know, back in the time where you were in that function, and you were to receive that, what would your take be on it at that point when you were to see that? And would you go to question them around certain environments that they were working in and whether or not that contributed to them leaving?
I probably would ask some questions, yes. I think we do have to take a different view today than even 5 years ago on jumpy CVs in inverted commas. I think we have to take a different view because, you know, younger generations are moving around more, and their values and their willingness to stay if their values are misaligned with the company's values, you know, there's much less patience for that, and that is a good thing. And companies need to catch up, really. I think it's because a lot of Gen X is the ones that are recruiting, and it's like, well, you know, we put up with it or we went through it. But I think what we do want to see as HR, as hiring managers, is resilience. And if you've tried to do whatever you can to stick it out or to find a way through, find solutions, you know, you do want people that have got tenacity and have got staying power, and aren't flaky. So I think it's a balance between those two things you want to see. But at the end of the day, nobody should stay in a place that is making them unhappy. I think that's what's shifted so much, is our awareness around our own mental health, and where we're at each day has changed dramatically. And so you're perhaps less willing to, stay somewhere, which in my time we would have just stayed. And
well, my time too, actually. And, you know, you look at a CV and you think, oh, wow, they're really loyal. And I did a video on this, funnily enough, the other day, talking about that, because you speak to people that have been in particular businesses in a similar role. I mean, they may have progressed a little bit, but for a really long period of time. And then if they're now keen to move, they're often a little bit nervous of that because they're so set in their ways. So it's a weird one, isn't it? Because you look at somebody who has been at lots of different companies or maybe stayed for 2 years at a time, and, you know, that makes some hiring managers uncomfortable. But then you look at somebody else and you think, well, both are, I guess, have got pros and cons to both. So I want to move on a little bit now. You said your last position, obviously, at Dr Barbara Sturm, you then moved on to Tom Ford from there. You were still doing some consultancy in between. When was the light bulb moment that you thought, okay, now's the time for People Flow, which is your business, which combines, from what I know of it, from what I understand of it, it combines building community, promoting wellness, educating in a HR function, supporting HR in both larger organisations as well as smaller independents. Where did this all come from? Talk me through that.
I think I just realised that I wanted to have more of an impact in more organisations, and more human-centred, you know, ways of doing things on a wider scale was going to only be possible if I wasn't a chief people officer in one brand. And I wanted to get my ideas out there more. And I think that, on top of holding the events for the community, which I've been doing now for over a year, has just been, it's just been such a rewarding experience for me. First of all, because it is a lot of up and coming HR professionals, or many of them have, you know, are in really amazing roles now, but just the bravery and the courage that they're showing and the questions that I'm being asked is really challenging me as well. And I I just knew that is what I really want to do. I want to have more of an impact, and I think you can do that in a chief people officer role. Of course you can, but you're only doing it, within a smaller environment. And so it was just clear to me that the consulting side of my business would enable me to impact more businesses, and then community, which I think is one of the most critical things to find. A sense of belonging, a sense of feeling like you can be you. It's quite rare, and in human resources especially, because everything's confidential and you often feel quite isolated and quite alone. And so that sense of community for me, but also that I could see in other people, was what really was driving me wanting to put all my energy and all my heart into it.
You were still at Tom Ford at the time when People Flow sort of started to take off, right? So when was that time where you had to let go of the ultimate brand and decide, okay, this is it, my full focus is going to be on this business?
Yeah. Well, before I started at Tom Ford, I'd already hired an employee, Fenella, who is amazing. And she was focused on growing the community. And obviously I had no time to do any consulting whilst I was at Tom Ford. So it was the community that was kind of growing from before I took the role. And I don't know that there was one defining moment, to be honest, but I could just see that if I don't dedicate time to this, it's going to, it will grow, but it's just going to be kind of slow and bumbling along. And I was just getting so much from the moments that I was spending with the community that I just wanted to take the leap. Oh, turning 50, that was the other defining moment.
No one will believe
it
year. Is the truth. Because I didn't. When you told me that when we were sitting having a coffee, I was like, no way on earth are you 50. You look fantastic.
Thank you.
It's all of that.
All the products.
The Barbara Sturm. I mean, all of that. You look fabulous. For those people that are listening to this that don't know about People Flow, I mean, you are on LinkedIn, you do promote quite heavily, especially around your events, but would you just share with us what the vision, the mission is of the business and what you hope to achieve by having this community and your consultancy services on the side of that?
Sure. So the community has come about through having these breakfasts and trying to figure out why HR is so burnt out, but it's become so much more than that now. It's really about helping people to become more resilient in HR and have the skills and almost the protection in a way to really be able to make change in their organizations and to speak up. It takes a lot of courage to break and reinvent outdated systems in workplaces. It takes a lot of energy, and it feels like what we're building now is a collective energy to do that. Learning from each other. So the community is for individuals or for teams. We've got lots of brands that are putting their HR teams in now. We meet on a monthly basis. There's different things that you can kind of tap into during the month. There's a platform of resources that you can, like human-centered policies and things like that you can download and adapt for your own business. And then there's the events that we have, in real life events, which are always centered around wellness, around being able to share without your shiny Instagram mask on what the real things are that you have to go through. And we cover topics like what to do if your boss is an absolute arsehole and you're never going to be able to, drive this initiative through, or what to do if you do work in a toxic work environment. Like, how do you help people through that and yourself and not burn out? It's those kinds of things that we get to discuss. And it's I love it. I just absolutely love it. And then on the consultancy side, lots of kind of smaller brands maybe that don't have their own HR function or have a really small team, helping them to build more inclusive workplace cultures by designing, human-centric frameworks and policies and just I guess culture transformation is also what the consultancy kind of focuses on, and that's building now. So we've got some lovely brands which are joining us. So yeah, it's those two arms, and it is exciting.
It really is. I mean, like I said at the beginning, I came to your last event and I just fell in love with the whole, the whole thing around People Flow. I just thought what you do and the people that you're connected with, and just being a part of that, really, it gave me a sense of belonging as well. Obviously, I don't work in HR, but I work in recruitment, which is very people focused. It's the same sort of thing, really. And I just really loved it. Going back to what you just said, with People Flow being able to support larger, bigger, corporations and bigger brands, and then much smaller independents. What do you think the key challenges are of the smaller businesses that don't necessarily have their own HR function? And why do you think they would really benefit from reaching out or having somebody like you to come in and support them?
I think what we can offer is really senior kind of support and advice for a fraction of the cost of hiring, obviously, their own person. So we have some brands that are just 25 people, up to 150 and beyond in terms of outsourced services, outsourced HR services. I never thought, as a chief people officer inside a brand, I would always be kind of against outsourced HR services. But what we're trying to create is this team of amazing people that just feel like an extension of your team. So you are getting, this seniority without needing to hire in-house and make that commitment, which at the moment in the current economic climate is proving to be really useful. And then also we've got all the experience that, is coming from 20-year career in luxury fashion. And so knowing what works and what doesn't work is really an advantage.
And what do you think the key trends are within HR that you think employees really are going to be looking for, especially when perhaps applying to work for a particular company? Because now it's not just about their getting the best offer in terms of salary or brand. Before you would think, look at this big shiny brand, and there would be influx of CVs and applicants. But people are really savvy now about what's going on culturally in organisations. What do you think the key trends are going to be going forward to really attract the best talent in the market?
I do think it is about what learning opportunities are on offer and what wellbeing opportunities are on offer. It's those two elements that give people a sense of this company really values me, this company's really thinking about me and my mental state and also my future career. So I think those kind of questions get asked more and more. And as you said, it's far less about the actual salary and package these days, and those elements, and much more about the other things that do, give you a real benefit. I think also it is more and more about how much is this employer going to trust me and offer flexibility, offer different kinds of options for me. I think that's definitely something that is an expectation now, whether it's hybrid or not. And I know shop floor is never easy to be hybrid, impossible in fact. But there are other options that can be thought of for people working in retail on the shop floor. I think it's those elements that really make a difference to people.
Definitely. And another thing is obviously knowing if there's a great leader in HR. I talk about this so often, and there's certain clients of mine that I think are phenomenal that have really gone into particular organisations and done wonders for their culture and changed certain things. What do you think the key is to great leadership in HR?
It is about transparency. It's about trust. And I think when you're being transparent as you possibly can be, because there's always that sense that you can't trust HR because they know so much more, and at the end of the day we do still have to do our jobs if companies are downsizing. But there's ways that you can do that to help people feel respected. And I think great HR people have a lot of their own resilience, so people can kind of trust in that as well. They're reliable. And they're really thinking about the actual human, not the employee number, not employees. They're thinking about the human.
I love that you said that, because whenever we work across, like in our business, we have various different partners across the luxury retail and fashion industries, and now some really amazing lifestyle companies too. But what's so lovely is if we do work with a brand that really does support their employees, a bit of a thing that we're constantly saying to candidates is that this particular brand really treats you as an individual and not just a number. And that's really attractive to a lot of people. So that's a really good point that you made. So now we're in the swing of people flow. You love it. Your eyes completely glisten whenever I mention it. And it's just so lovely to see. And being at that event, you know, it really was evident how passionate you are about building this community. What does the future hold? And what are the next steps for People Flow?
Yeah. Well, we're really listening to what our community actually want. And that's also a transferable skill from, you know, being inside a company and really listening to what people want, what employees want. So we're designing it based on that. I mean, my network is, you know, the fashion network of Milan, Paris, New York. We'd love to take our events global next year and really extend the community out and have more businesses put their teams into this community, because I think the more that businesses can help their HR teams to feel resilient, feel supported, feel a sense of their own belonging, the better they're going to be able to serve their employees. So that's where we see the growth of the community happening, is that we're just able to create this really safe space, but that businesses also see the real value of giving this to their HR teams to be part of the community. And then I'd really love to just do the community at some point. But the consulting is obviously really super interesting. And I am growing that too. But my heart is definitely with the community itself.
You can see that. But who wouldn't want you as a consultant with all of your years of experience and all these incredible brands that you've worked with and seeing so many different things? So I guess to sort of close things off, and I've still got a few little questions to ask you, but to sort of close things off, for somebody who is looking to build a career in HR, and not just to build a career, to really end up like you, to be that real trailblazer, what advice would you give for somebody starting off from the beginning, perhaps as you did without the degree initially? What advice? Yeah.
I think you have to. So the CIPD, you know, does offer a lot of different courses, and in the UK, it is always good to have the kind of CIPD accreditation. So I'd definitely say to start there. It is having a real curiosity and fascination with understanding what makes people tick. So whether you've done, you know, any psychology, or that would have been really helpful to me. If I had gone to uni straight from school, I would like to have done psychology or something like that. That can be really helpful. I think it is about your network and just taking every single opportunity that you can to try to figure out the pathway through. I know it's not easy out there to be applying for jobs and stuff. If you haven't got the experience yet, you can certainly look me up, and I can try and help in some way, because my network is really vast. I think you've got to have a lot of your own resilience. So the earlier you can start focusing on, you know, what are the key pillars for you that are going to help you to stay motivated and on that path, if that's what you want to achieve, if you want to get a job in HR. And I think, you know, there's so many aspects of HR as well. You have to think, what are my genuine experiences and skills that could be transferable? And if it is more the numbers and data side, there's a lot that, you know, of HR that is that has been game changing from the sense of great people in data and analytics from a people perspective. So that might be your thing. It's really looking at all the different aspects of HR and figuring out, you know, there is the generalist route, which kind of covers everything. But there are also the specialisms, which might be more interesting to you, learning and development, for example, or people analytics or employee relations, if that's, you know, dealing with people and the kind of business partnering side is what appeals to you. So I think taking advice, asking for mentorship. I have to say, I feel like I carved my way in and I think you can still do that. I really do. But you have to be strategic about it and you do have to be resilient.
You mentioned earlier in the conversation that you have a mentor.
Yeah.
And I guess a question I need to ask you then is, how instrumental has that been for you in your career by having that person there?
Yeah, I mean, I have always sought out mentors. The one person that I was talking about from Myla is still my mentor today in multiple aspects of what I am now going through in creating People Flow. But I've always sought out mentors and asked people's advice. And I think that there's still a real kindness and open-heartedness out there for just asking people, just being brave. And whether it's in real life that you meet someone or whether it's on LinkedIn, I really think you can ask people these days. I get asked quite a lot for mentorship, and it is down to timing and what's going on for me at the time, obviously, but I have given that to people, and you can just ask for an hour's coffee or 20 minutes coffee with somebody who you're now able to reach. I mean, in my case, before LinkedIn, before the social platforms, you know, there wasn't that opportunity, and I would be looking for people in real life. But I've always sought out someone that's further ahead than me, someone that's already done it, someone that's, you know, been in this industry that I want to break into. How did they do it? And just, you know, finding those people that can advise you.
I think that is so important. Mm-hmm. I mean, I absolutely agree with everything you've just said there. And it's something that I think a lot of people in any industry that they're working in should really focus on, and ask the question. You know, if you do admire somebody and you admire their work and, you know, they inspire you, why wouldn't you ask them for that? And that's something I'm really, you know, I guess you should. Well, you're an accredited coach, so you must do that for people all the time, and to see them grow the way you did must be really rewarding.
Definitely. I think a lot of people would like to give back, and don't necessarily have the time to find ways in which they can do that. So if you happen to reach out on the right day, then quite often you will get a positive response from people, and definitely it's very rewarding to be able to share any little nuggets of wisdom or advice that you can.
And I think maybe just to add to that, those people that perhaps are listening that think, well, you know, maybe I'm a bit shy or I'm a bit embarrassed to ask somebody, you know, for the person that's being asked, it must be really flattering as well for somebody. So that you should think of it as a compliment to them if you are going to reach out and ask them. And you're right, this is what the social media, what the platforms are all for.
Definitely.
So I guess that's a bit of advice that you would give then. Definitely. If somebody is out there, regardless of whether they're in HR, in retail, whatever it is, if there's someone that is out there that you are really inspired by, ask them for a 20-minute coffee. Why not?
Exactly.
It's important. So when you look back at your career, what do you then hope your legacy will be in the HR and luxury sectors?
I'd like my legacy to be that I put a bit of a different language into HR and helped HR to transform itself in some way. And by doing that, it has helped to impact people's real lives. And what I love about HR is, and what we often don't think about, we think about the employees and the people, but we don't necessarily think how much wider our support and our listening or whatever it is that we're giving to people might go, the ripple effects with their family, and the policies that we might put in place from a family perspective might really change someone's life. and I think that's something that I really like to think about, and what I feel like everyone who would like to get into HR should also think about, because it makes it so much bigger and connected
But you're 100% right, because people that are at work, you spend the majority of your life at work. So it does change their lives.
Yeah.
You know, and if they're happy at work, they're happy in life. I really do believe that.
Yeah.
If listeners could take away just one piece of advice from today's conversation, what would you hope it would be?
That if you really want to get into HR and you are on the shop floor today, that there is a way, and that I could be a representation of that. And you just got to go for it.
And to reach out to you, to
Yeah.
ask for advice and mentorship and coaching. For sure, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm really, really grateful for this conversation, honestly. And when we first met for coffee and we started speaking, and I held you up and I was like, no, I don't want to hear this now. I want to talk to you over my podcast, because I think that so many people in my network, and of course yours, will really benefit from hearing your story and just hearing how you did it, and things that are important to you, and why People Flow is now what it is, and what you're hoping to achieve from it. And I'm really grateful for your time to have given that to me today. And I want you just to close off this conversation by telling people that aren't familiar with yourself, perhaps, or with People Flow, where they can find you. What are your social media, on LinkedIn? Where can people find you?
Yeah. Well, we're on Instagram. We are People Flow is the name of the company. We're on Instagram. We're on LinkedIn. We post a lot on LinkedIn. And we share quite a bit of what the community also is about, and what the community has access to. We share little snippets. But also our website, wearepeopleflow.com.
Amazing. I'm so grateful, Abigail. Honestly, it's really been a pleasure, and I can't
lovely.
thank you enough for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.